Loretta Gaines had no intention of stopping in town that morning. She wasn't out of flour, didn't need a length of wire or any new stitching thread. Truth be told, she hadn't needed much of anything since the world took her husband and then her voice with it. Most days she rode through town like a shadow boot's quiet coat, black eyes averted. People knew better than to call her name. But that morning something pulled her reins. Maybe it was the wind, sudden and strange, shifting southward like it carried something urgent. Maybe it was that quiet tug in her chest that had grown louder over the past few weeks, the feeling that her house, her land, her soul were all too empty for the living. Whatever it was, it led her wagon off the trail and into the square. That's when she saw them. 3 boys stood barefoot beside the old water trough, each with a burlap sack tied loosely over his head, rope around his wrists. A chalkboard leaned against a barrel beside them. It read $5 a head. No returns, no questions. People stood around as if it were a Sunday raffle. A rancher took a sip of coffee. A woman in a bonnet whispered behind her hand, but no one moved toward the boys. Not yet. Not until someone braver or crueler stepped forward. Loretta stepped down. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her presence alone made heads turn. The auctioneer, a man with a crooked smile and tobacco-stained hands, cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, more cautious than mocking. "They ain't trained. Don't talk. Don't cry. Not much use yet, but they might turn decent with some belt and bread." Loretta didn't flinch. She walked past him, eyes locked on the tallest boy, maybe 12. His knees were shaking, but he didn't fall. The middle one had a busted lip and wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The smallest, barely more than 5, just stared through the sack like he was trying to see something that hadn't happened yet. She reached into her coat. Her coin purse was old and cracked, but it still carried weight. She pressed 3 silver dollars into the man's hand, then looked him in the eye. "All of them," she said. He hesitated. "You sure ain't no paperwork. Don't know their names, not even where untie them." He grumbled but obeyed. As the sacks came off, the oldest boy looked ready to run, but his eyes landed on Loretta and held. The youngest blinked against the light, then whispered without hesitation, "Mrs. Gaines." The name struck her like a church bell. She hadn't spoken it aloud in months, not even in prayer. But this child, this stranger, had said it like he'd known her forever. "How do you know my name?" she asked softly. "I dreamed it," he said, rubbing his wrists. "A lady said you'd come, that you'd take us home." The crowd stiffened. A few people backed away. Superstition ran deep in those parts. But Loretta didn't blink. She simply turned to the boys and said, "Come with me." They rode back in silence. She didn't offer food, didn't ask questions. She knew better than to press too soon. Some wounds needed stillness more than bandages. Her home waited quiet and worn. The porch sagged. The garden had gone to weed, but it stood and it would stand for them. When they arrived, she lit the fire, made batter, served them with clean forks and soft words. They didn't thank her, not yet. But that night, when she tucked the youngest into a blanket near the hearth, he whispered again, "You're real." Loretta touched his forehead, felt the heat of grief not yet spoken. "So are you." And for the first time in years, she left the lamp burning all night, not for ghosts, but for the living who had finally found their way home. The house groaned in the cold. Floorboards creaked with each step as if the very wood beneath their feet had grown used to silence and didn't welcome change easily. The walls still held dust in the corners from winters past, and the kitchen window fogged with the breath of morning. Even before anyone lit a match. But it was home now, if not yet to the boys, then at least to the idea of them. Loretta Gaines woke before first light, same as she always had. She lit the stove, filled the basin with well water, and sliced a bruised apple for the pot of oats. She didn't check on the boys immediately. She didn't need to. Their breathing in the parlor, low, uneven, but steady, was enough to let her know they were still there. Still staying. By breakfast, the youngest Jude was already sitting cross-legged near the fire, turning a spoon over in his hands like it was a piece of treasure. He didn't speak, but his eyes followed her every move. Calder, the middle boy, hovered in the corner, arms crossed, face unreadable. The eldest Thorn didn't come to the table until she called him. Even then, he didn't sit. He stood behind the chair for several seconds before finally settling, like a man bracing for something to go wrong. "I didn't poison it," Loretta said without looking up. He flinched, just a little, but he took the first bite. They didn't talk much that day, or the next. Loretta didn't force it. She gave them tasks, simple ones, gathering kindling, dusting shelves, folding the worn linens in the trunk at the foot of the stairs. She gave no orders, only instructions. The difference she'd learned was everything. When Calder dropped a tin cup and winced like he expected to be struck, Loretta just bent down and picked it up beside him. "It's a cup," she said, "not a commandment." His mouth opened, then closed, and he nodded without a word. That evening, while the snow whispered outside and the wind tested the shutters, Loretta opened a wooden box beneath her bed and pulled out a small leather-bound book. She placed it on the table. "I used to read this when I was your age," she said, not expecting any response. "Sometimes it helped me feel less alone. Sometimes it just helped me fall asleep." None of them moved. So she read anyway. Her voice was steady but soft. She didn't read the grand parts, the miracles, the plagues. She read the quiet things, the lines about sparrows and lilies, about the widow's oil that never ran dry. She read until the fire settled low, and the boys' shoulders had dropped an inch from where they started. The next morning, Thorn asked where the axe was. She looked up from her mixing bowl. "What for? I want to chop wood. You know how." He hesitated, enough to try. Loretta set the bowl down, wiped her hands, and led him out to the shed. The axe was old but balanced. She showed him how to check the grain, where to place his hands, how to split down the line and not at an angle. Thorn said nothing, but she saw the tension in his jaw loosen as he sunk the blade into the first log and watched it fall clean in two. Calder followed her to the garden that same afternoon. The soil was stiff and stingy, but she showed him how to loosen it, how to move gently enough to avoid snapping the roots. When he found a worm, he looked up like he didn't know what to do. "You don't need to fear it," she said. "It's doing more good than most people." He set the worm aside carefully and kept digging. Inside, Jude sang under his breath while sweeping. Not full verses, just snippets of something from another life. Old hymns, maybe, or lullabies. "I'll be somewhere, waiting for you." He hummed, dragging the broom in neat, perfect lines across the floor. By the end of that week, Loretta realized something astonishing. The boys had stopped asking whether they could do something. They had started doing. The plates were set without instruction. The porch was cleared of snow before she could get to it. Calder began reading aloud by the hearth in the evenings, stumbling over longer words, but never stopping. Jude clapped for him every time, even if Calder just shook his head and muttered, "That ain't worth clapping for." "It is," Jude replied. "It's brave." Thorn, who once slept with one eye open and one foot pointed toward the door, began leaving his boots at the threshold without checking twice. He built a rack for them, even hammered it to the wall himself. When Loretta saw it, she ran her fingers along the edges and said nothing, but her hands trembled when she turned away. One night, while cleaning the hearth, she found a folded paper beneath her chair. It was a drawing, crude, mostly stick figures, but she recognized herself in the middle. The word home was scrawled above her head in crooked block letters. She didn't ask who drew it. She didn't need to. That same night as the fire died low, and the boys nestled under old quilts by the stove, Loretta whispered toward the ceiling, not in prayer exactly, but in something older. "Thank you," she said. No one stirred, but even if they had, they wouldn't have asked her who she was thanking, because by then they already knew. The first warning came not with shouting or gunfire, but with silence. That strange, sharp-edged stillness that settles over a place before something happens. The kind that makes dogs bark for no reason and stoves burn uneven. Loretta Gaines felt it before she saw it. A hitch in her breath, a flicker at the edge of the woodline, a crow that watched the porch too long. She tried to ignore it at first. Focused on the bread dough she was kneading on the way, Calder had started humming while he shelled peas on how Jude's handwriting was finally legible, backward R's and all. But the feeling didn't leave. Then came the knock. It was a hard 3-beat rap that rattled the wood like it had every right to. Beck stood first quiet but tense. Loretta motioned for him to sit, took the rifle from the mantel, and opened the door herself. The man standing on her porch looked like he belonged in a dime novel. Tall, clean boots, dark duster, a polished mustache that curled at the tips like it practiced villainy. But it was his eyes, dry and pale like stones left too long in the sun, that made her fingers tighten on the stock. "Afternoon," he said. "You must be Mrs. Gaines." "I might be," she answered. "I heard you've got something of mine." "No," she said flatly. "I've got someone's. 3 of them." He held up a folded parchment. "Transfer order. Judge McClary's seal. Legal custody granted to me in full." Loretta didn't reach for the paper. "Judge McClary died last year." He smiled. "Then call it posthumous mercy." From behind her, Jude's voice rose quiet and unshaking. "He's the man from the place with the locked door." The man's smile cracked. "You should teach that one to hush." Thorne was already on his feet, moving like a shadow from behind the chair. "You should leave now." "Boy," the man said, stepping forward, "you might have grown tall, but you're still just a stray I paid for." Loretta raised the rifle. "Say that again," she warned. "See what happens." The air stretched. Calder stepped beside his brother, fists clenched, jaw tight. "I'll come back with a warrant," the man muttered. "You do that," Loretta said, "and I'll leave a light on for your soul." He left, but the silence he dragged in with him stayed behind. That night, no one slept much. The boys curled close, firelight dancing on their faces. Thorne didn't speak until long after midnight. "He's not alone," he said. "He never was." Loretta nodded. "I know." Calder leaned in, voice low. "He'll come back, won't he?" "Yes." Jude looked up. "Then we stay ready." The next morning they changed the locks. Loretta dug out her late husband's old revolver from the barn rafters and laid it on the kitchen table next to a box of ammunition. The sight of it made her stomach turn, but she didn't flinch. Some things were too important to avoid. She gave each boy a job, not to distract, but to empower. Thorne set traps along the back trails, took stock of supplies, reinforced the doors. Calder created decoy fires to confuse any nighttime intruders. Jude drew maps with colored chalk marking the house, the barns, the routes to the creek. 3 days passed. Then another sign. A goat dead in the morning, neck snapped, no blood, not taken, not eaten, just a message. "It's not wolves," Thorne said. "Wolves don't leave trophies." Loretta said nothing. She just began teaching Thorne how to use the rifle. Not for vengeance, not even for defense, but so he would know what it meant to hold something that could take a life. "You shoot to protect," she told him, "and only if every other way is gone." He listened, but the threat didn't wait. It came 5 nights later in the form of a new stranger, a rider barely older than Thorne himself, slumped in the saddle with a telegram crumpled in his hand. "Message for Mrs. Gaines," he rasped. "Urgent." Loretta took it, unfolding it with fingers that had once mended every kind of wound, but still trembled at a folded letter. "3 boys taken. Southbound wagon. Auction bound. Need help. C." She didn't ask who C was. She didn't need to. Calder's eyes told her everything. The boys had never told her the full story, but the scars on their bodies and the quiet panic in their sleep had filled in the rest. "I'll go," she said. Thorne shook his head. "No, you won't go alone. I'm not asking, and I'm not leaving you alone again." Loretta turned to him. "This isn't about pride. This is about doing what's right before it becomes too late." He lowered his gaze. "Then I'm riding with you." They left at dawn, a storm building behind them in the hills. Calder stayed back with Jude, the rifle near the window, the lamp lit all night. In town, they found a trail, a wagon that had snapped an axle near the trading post. The owner had fixed it and moved on, heading east toward Porter's Mill, a place whispered about in saloons and sheriff offices as the kind of town where things went missing and nobody asked why. Thorne cursed under his breath. "We're not going to find them in time." Loretta didn't answer. She just kicked her horse forward. By dusk, they saw the smoke fires dotting a valley full of tents, a crude fence around a holding pen, boys packed like freight. Loretta didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just said, "We go in quiet." But Thorne had already lit the fuse. The camp at Porter's Mill wasn't a town. It was a wound dressed up in smoke and tents, with laughter that didn't belong to joy and fences that spoke louder than any sermon ever could. The pen in the center wasn't for livestock. It was for children. 3 boys huddled near a stack of crates, arms tangled together like they had forgotten how to sleep without touching someone else. One had a limp. One still wore the sack. The third stared at the sky like he knew someone was coming. He was right. Loretta and Thorne crouched on the ridge dusk, painting the hills in iron and red. "Too many guards," Thorne whispered. "Half of them armed." "We don't need all of them to drop," Loretta said, steady as stone. "Just the right one." Below, a whistle rang out. A lantern passed between 2 tents. "If we wait too long, we don't wait." She didn't say it with force. She said it like a vow that had already been etched somewhere deep in her bones. That night, they moved like ghosts. Thorne went east along the perimeter, quiet as a fox, slipping between tents, cutting ropes, scattering coals into the dust. He carried a slingshot, nothing more silent and fast. He'd learned long ago that loud didn't mean effective. Loretta moved slower, straighter, like she belonged there. A woman in worn boots, carrying nothing but a look that dared someone to stop her. No one did. The boys saw her before she spoke. The youngest blinked hard, thinking maybe he was dreaming. But the oldest reached for her hand through the bars and didn't let go. She pressed a finger to her lips, then snapped the lock with a rock she'd palmed from the trail. Behind them, a sharp crack, then another. Thorne's signal. A torch was dropped on purpose. A crate kicked over. Then the explosion. It wasn't big, just one stick of dynamite. But it shook the valley like a divine warning, scattering shadows into motion and guards into panic. Tents collapsed. Horses screamed. A man shouted orders that no one followed. Thorne charged through the gap, grabbed the smallest boy, and flung him onto the saddle, waiting in the brush. Loretta hoisted another onto her mount. The third clung to her waist as they galloped toward the trees, the sound of gunfire trailing them like broken thunder. They didn't look back. By dawn, they crossed the river, the same one Thorne had once refused to ride past, because it marked everything they'd tried to leave behind. This time, they crossed it with 7 souls instead of 5. And the difference was everything. Back home, Calder stood on the porch, rifle in hand. Jude beside him, clutching a Bible too big for his arms. When Loretta rode up, hair damp with sweat and rain blood crusted at her sleeve, she didn't speak. She just climbed down, lifted one of the rescued boys into her arms, and carried him inside like a mother returning from war with something sacred. No one asked questions that morning. They boiled water. They made bread. They burned every piece of clothing the boys had worn in that pen and buried the burlap sacks under the plum tree. The next day, Loretta found one of the new boys, Jonas, standing at the hearth, unmoving. "Did they say your name?" she asked. He nodded once. "You want to keep it?" Another nod. "Then it's yours." That night, Jude placed a folded drawing under her pillow. It showed a crooked house with smoke curling from the chimney and a tree next to it, tall and green. 7 stick figures stood beneath the branches holding hands. On the trunk, in uneven print, one word had been written. "Ours." Thorne found her crying over that picture, not hidden, not ashamed. Just quiet tears falling onto her lap as she held it like scripture. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her, handed her a mug of tea, and leaned his shoulder against hers, like the boy he almost never let himself be. That winter they sealed the old root cellar. Thorne said it felt like bad history. Loretta agreed. They built a second fence with Caleb's old nails, and this time she didn't have to lift the hammer. Calder and Thorne finished it themselves. Jude painted a wooden sign to hang above the porch, Boone Light. When Loretta asked him why he picked that name, he answered plainly, "Because it's what this house does. It lights the lost one's home." They didn't talk about Porter's Mill often. The boys who'd been rescued didn't speak of what happened there, and Loretta didn't press. But some nights, when the wind moaned too low, when the fire hissed without cause, they sat a little closer together. And that was enough. Jonas eventually stopped flinching when a door slammed. Paulie began to hum like Jude. Ben, the youngest, the one who never spoke, began to leave notes in chalk along the walls, words like safe and stay. Each time Loretta wiped one clean, another would appear the next morning. She let them stay after that. In February, the tree bloomed. No one expected it to not, after the frost had come so early, not after the soil had frozen over. But one morning, Jude ran in barefoot, shouting about white blossoms. Loretta followed him to the hill. There, where they had once buried the past, something had grown. It wasn't large. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and for her, for all of them, that was enough. The snow had barely melted when the first new letter came. It wasn't folded like a telegram or sealed like an official post. Just a scrap of parchment wedged into the crack of the door, slick from morning dew. Loretta found it while feeding the hens. It bore no name, only 5 words scrawled in sharp ink. "You took what was paid for." She burned it in the stove without blinking. But that same evening, Thorne found the chicken coop door ajar and one of the hens' gone feathers scattered like teeth along the fence. Calder tracked prints near the barn, human, not animal, booted and deliberate. The next morning, the goat was dead, laid out at the garden's edge, eyes wide. Neck broken with a single twist. "It's a warning," Thorne said, crouching by the carcass. "No," Loretta replied, voice flat. "It's an invitation." They began sleeping in shifts. Jonas, still skittish but steadier than he used to be, took to sleeping near the window with Calder's hunting knife under his pillow. Jude, who once wept in his sleep, now lay in the crook of Loretta's arm without a sound, as if her heartbeat alone was enough to silence the ghosts. And Thorne, whose back never touched a wall when he first arrived, sat each night by the front door, rifle balanced across his knees, watching the moon trace its arc across the dark. But peace wasn't the point anymore. Preparation was. 2 weeks later, on Thorne's 16th birthday, Loretta handed him a coat. Dark wool lined with faded cotton buttons, tarnished but intact. It had belonged to her husband. She didn't say that. She didn't need to. Thorne looked at her hands trembling slightly as he slid one arm in, then the other. "I'm not him," he said. "No," Loretta replied, eyes glinting. "You're who he would have wanted to be." That was the morning the stray arrived. It was a mutt, half shepherd, half coyote maybe, with one torn ear and eyes that had seen too much. Jude spotted it first through the kitchen window, tail wagging low and unsure. "Should I call him?" he asked. "No," Loretta said. "Wait." They waited. The dog didn't move, didn't beg, just watched. Then came the sound, sharp, distant, a gunshot. Then 3 more. Clean, patterned, meant to be heard. Loretta's blood chilled. She recognized that rhythm. The same one that haunted her dreams since Porter's Mill. Inside she ordered, "Now." They hunkered down, windows boarded, rifles loaded. That night no one slept. Calder stood on the roof with binoculars. Thorne stayed by the cellar door. Loretta boiled water not for tea but to scald if needed. But no one came. Not that night. On the 3rd day of tension, Loretta made her decision. "We leave." What? Thorne snapped. "We just got safe." "No," she said. "We got strong. There's a difference, and now it's time to use it." She revealed a map one her husband had kept in a chest buried under floorboards near the stove. It marked the ridgelines, the towns that didn't ask questions, and one specific place, a church-run homestead 2 valleys east, that helped keep children from being trafficked. "I'm going," she said. "I need to speak with the pastor there. They'll know where the boys are being taken next." "I'm coming," Thorne said immediately. "You're staying," she answered. "They'll expect me. They don't know you." "I don't care, I do." She touched his arm. "If I don't come back in 2 days, you come after me, with everything you've got." He didn't argue after that. Loretta left at dusk with the revolver at her side, a loaf of bread in her satchel, and the dog whom Jude had named Boomer trailing behind. She didn't make it far. 10 miles out, the rain started. Then came the riders, 4 men on dark horses with scarves over their faces and ledgers in their saddlebags. One held a chain. "Loretta Gaines," the leader said. "We heard you're collecting property that don't belong to you." "I don't collect," she replied, hand at her hip. "I raise." "She's mouthy," one snorted. "Good," another said. "I like 'em loud." She drew her weapon first, but she was outnumbered and they knew the terrain. Within minutes they had her disarmed and bound. One man struck her cheek, another tied her wrists too tight. "She'll fetch a decent trade," the last one said. Older but still strong. Back home, Thorne waited 2 days. On the 3rd, he saddled the horse. Jude stood by the fence, eyes wide. "Don't leave me behind. You're not coming." "I have to," Jude said. "She's my mom." That stopped him cold. They rode before dawn. Calder followed silent, holding the 2nd revolver Loretta had left behind. They carried rations, 2 maps, and fire in their chests. At the ridge, they found her horse bullet to the chest reins dragging. Jude knelt by the trail, touched the blood in the dirt, and said, "She's not gone. She's fighting." They tracked the prints east into the rocks. On the 4th day, Calder spotted the shack. Smoke rose faint from the chimney. A scarf Loretta's was tied to the railing like a signal. Thorne didn't hesitate. They stormed the cabin like men grown. Calder to the window, Thorne to the door, Jude just behind with Boomer barking like fury incarnate. Inside they found her bound to a post, lip split, eyes swollen but alive. "You came," she whispered. Thorne cut the ropes. "Always." They didn't wait for the captors to return. They prepared. Loretta showed them the back exit, a collapsed mine shaft. They escaped into it just as the men returned, yelling, boots pounding on the porch. Inside the dark, the boys lit a lantern, then waited. When the men followed, armed and grinning, they were met with a rifle barrel, a boy with eyes like coals, and a mother who pulled the trigger. They didn't speak much on the ride home. The silence wasn't born from fear, not this time. It came from something deeper. Reverence, maybe. Exhaustion, too. But also an unspoken sense that something had shifted. Loretta rode between Thorn and Calder, her wrists still raw, her jaw bruised. Jude curled against her back, arms tight around her waist, head resting near her shoulder blade like he needed to feel her breathing to know it was real. Boomer limped behind the wagon, loyal as ever, dirt and smoke clinging to his matted fur. By the time they crested the final hill, the cabin came into view. Lamplight glowing behind the fogged windows. Smoke curling steady from the chimney. Jonas stood on the porch, small hands wrapped around the banister. When he saw them, he didn't shout. He just opened the door wide and waited. They were home. That night, no one asked what had happened. No one needed to. Instead, they built a fire so big it lit the whole yard. Not for warmth, not for fear, but to burn the last of the rope, the scarf, the blood-stained cloth from the shack. They stood around it, hands clasped, eyes forward. Jude took Loretta's hand. "You're still ours," he whispered. "I always was," she answered. The days that followed were slow, careful, filled with the kind of stillness earned only after chaos. Calder repaired the broken fence rail. Jonas began teaching Ben to tie knots using scraps of yarn. Polly carved a little wooden dog that looked suspiciously like Boomer and gave it to Jude. Thorn stayed close to the porch. He wasn't afraid anymore, but he was ready. Loretta knew the difference. A letter arrived a week later, postmarked from a place no one recognized. It was signed only with a single letter C. "More boys missing. Headed west. We'll need help. They trust the ones who've lived it." Loretta folded it slowly and placed it on the mantel beside the drawing Jude had given her months ago. The one with the crooked cabin and the word "ours" scratched in the sky. That evening she called a meeting. No speeches, just the truth. "There are more children out there," she said, "more who haven't been found yet, and I can't sit here knowing that while this house still has room." She looked to Thorn, to Calder, to the youngest ones now curling near the hearth. "You don't have to say yes," she added, "but I need you to know I'm not turning away, not ever again." Jude raised his hand first. "Can we help them build their own garden?" he asked. Loretta smiled. "That's the idea. I'll teach them how to read," Calder offered. "I'll teach them to fight," Thorn said simply. "If they need it." And that was that. Word spread slowly by travelers, by whispers, by church bulletins that said things like, "Sanctuary available, no questions asked." The Boone Light became more than a name. It became a destination. A battered boy from Iron Rock showed up with a busted lip and a single shoe. A girl from Ember Hollow arrived with no voice and a satchel full of pebbles she never let go of. Each one different, each one marked by what they had endured, but none of them stayed that way. Because Loretta didn't just offer shelter, she offered family. Sometimes she'd sit on the porch with a mug of coffee watching the younger ones chase chickens, while the older ones mended roof shingles or painted fence posts. And in those quiet moments she'd press a hand to her chest, not to feel her heartbeat, but to remind herself that it was still there, still alive, still strong. They planted more trees every year, a new one, for every child who stayed, for every child who left stronger than they came. Jude called them reminders of what someone once asked him. He shrugged. That no one disappears here. Not really. The original tree planted after the mine rescue stood taller now, its branches wide enough for a rope swing and its roots thick enough to weather any storm. They hung lanterns from it every winter, Jude made paper stars to tie to the limbs. On one particularly cold evening, as snow began to fall, a boy named Eli asked Loretta, "Are you really a mom?" She smiled, adjusting his scarf. "I didn't get to be one the usual way," she said, "but I chose to be one every single day since." Eli nodded solemnly. "Then that's better." And maybe it was, because some homes are built from brick and timber, but others, like Boone Light, are built from names spoken softly from hands extended across silence. From a woman who said no more and meant it. And when the storms came, as they always did, she didn't flinch. She stood in the doorway, lantern high, ready to light the way home, for whoever needed it, for as long as it took. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, it's who finds you in the dark and chooses to stay. The Boone Light is more than a cabin on a ridge. It's a promise, a story about a woman who had every reason to shut the world out, but instead opened her door. A story about boys who were passed around like burdens but still had the courage to hope and to fight. And it reminds us that love doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes with calloused hands and warm biscuits, with an old coat handed down and a nightlight left on. In a world that too often forgets, the forgotten Loretta Gaines remembered, not just once, but every day. Through gunfire, through snow, through every frightened child who knocked on her door. The truth is, healing isn't always about fixing what was broken. It's about building something better in its place. So if you've ever felt unwanted, unheard, unseen, remember this: you are not a burden. You are not your scars, and you are never beyond the reach of someone willing to light a lamp and wait. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. The Boone Light was built from moments like these, from stories that matter even in silence. So if you believe in second chances, in chosen families, in the kind of love that fights back, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to Frontier Reverie. Each click helps bring these stories to more people who need them. And if you're someone who's ever felt lost, we hope this light finds you too.